In this video, I'm going to demonstrate reading values from an existing file and saving results in a new file. I'll create a program that determines the number of lines, words, and characters in the existing file and saves those statistics in a new file. The names of the files will be provided to the program as command line parameters. Let's begin by writing some comments that describe our program and the steps that we'll take to implement it. Our program will begin by verifying that the correct number of command line parameters has been provided. If not, it will display an error message and quit. Then we'll open the input file for reading and the output file for writing. We'll need 3 counters, one to keep track of the number of lines, one to keep track of the number of words, and one to keep track of the number of characters. Then we'll use a loop to process each line in the file. The body of the loop will have to add the appropriate value to each counter based on the content of the line, and then read the next line from the file. Once all of the lines have been processed, our program will save the results in the output file. Finally, our program will close both of the files that it opened. Now it's time to write the Python code for each step in our algorithm. We'll begin by importing the system module. We need it because our program requires access to the command line parameters that the user will supply when starting our program. Then we'll check that the number of parameters is correct using an if statement. The first command line parameter is always the name of the Python source file that is being executed. This program also requires the name of an input file and the name of an output file, which means that it needs a total of 3 command line parameters. Our program will display an error message and quit if any other number of command line parameters is provided. The input file will be opened for reading by calling the open function. The name of the Python source file is at position 0 in the argument vector, so the name of the file that will be read as input is at position 1 in the argument vector. The second actual parameter to open is a lowercase r, which indicates that the file will be opened for reading. A similar open statement is used to open the output file. In this case, the second actual parameter is a lowercase w, which indicates that a new file will be opened for writing. If the file already exists, then open will destroy the existing version and create a new empty file. We'll continue by creating variables that hold the counts for lines, words, and characters. Each variable is initialized to 0. Then we'll write a loop that processes each line in the file. The first line will be read outside of the loop by calling the readLine method on the input file handle. Then a while loop will be used to read the remaining lines. The loop will keep on running as long as the result returned by readLine is something other than the empty string. Inside the loop, we'll add 1 to the counter for lines. We can determine the number of words by breaking the line up using the split method, and then measuring the length of the list that split returns. The number of characters in the line can be determined using the length function. Finally, the body of our loop needs to read the next line from the file. We'll save our results in the output file by calling the write method on the output file handle. The write method requires 1 parameter, and it must be a string. Each of our output lines will begin with a label describing the value that is being saved. Then the value will be converted to a string and concatenated to the label. Finally, we'll concatenate a new line character to the end of each string so that each output value is saved on its own line in the file. We'll complete our program by closing both of the files that we opened. Let's see what happens when we run our program. I have already created a file named input.txt that contains 2 lines of text. I'll use the more command to display its contents. As you can see, it contains 2 lines, 5 words, and a larger number of characters. Now we'll run our program with input.txt as the first command line parameter and output.txt as the second command line parameter. Our program will create output.txt as it runs. Python begins by importing the system module and checking the length of the argument vector. The argument vector contains a total of 3 items, which are the name of the Python file we are running, input.txt, and output.txt, so the condition on the if statement is false and its body is skipped. The next lines of code that run open the input file for reading and the output file for writing. Each of these statements creates a new file handle. A file handle provides access to a file and keeps track of our position in it. Invoking methods on the file handle allows us to read values and save values to a file. The next lines of code that run create the variables that will count the number of lines, words, and characters and initializes them to 0. Then the first line is read from the file. The condition on the while loop is true, so Python runs the body of the loop and the number of lines is increased. Python calls the split method on the first line. It returns a list where Mary is the first element and had is the second element. The length of this list is 2, so Python adds 2 to the word counter. Then Python determines the number of characters in the line and adds that value to the appropriate counter. Notice that the number of characters that was added was 9. 4 for Mary, 1 for the space, 3 for had, and 1 more for the new line character that separates this line from the next one. On some systems, the total will be 10 characters because the end of the line is denoted by a 2-character sequence. Our program continues by reading the next line of input, and then control returns to the top of the loop. The condition on the loop is true, so Python runs its body again, and 1 is added to the number of lines. When the split method is called, it returns a list where the first element is A, the second element is little, and the third element is lamb, so Python adds 3 to the word counter. The number of characters on this line is 15. 1 for A, 6 for little, 4 for lamb, 2 spaces, 1 period, and a new line character, so the character count increases to 24. The next line of code tries to read another line from the file, but there is no more data. Because nothing was read, Python sets line equal to the empty string. Control returns to the top of the while loop, and its condition is evaluated. It's false, so Python skips the body of the loop. Execution continues at the first output statement, which writes the first value to the output file with an appropriate label, and moves down to the next line. Similarly, the next 2 output statements each write a line to the file that consists of a label and a value. Finally, our program closes both of the files that it opened, and then it terminates. This program has demonstrated reading values from an existing file and saving values to a new file. I hope that watching this video has increased your understanding of these topics.